And within the explanation that I'm giving or a demonstration that I'm giving, I'm going to cover some of the theoretical aspects of what is required to keep in mind when you are faced with the writing exam. So, the discussion today is going to be based on understanding very clearly, how would you look at doing the writing exam in the center. So there are a couple of things that I would want to, obviously explain before I start with, the session. Now, one of the things that all of you need to be aware of, which is that English, when you have to do English exam, and the reason why you've been asked to look at an English exam. So, from my point of view, if I look at myself, if you haven't done your schooling in the UK, for example, when I say schooling, I've come in and I've got settled here, but I've given my GCSE and A-level exams privately, but you only managed GCSE English and Maths. Now, that to a certain extent might be acceptable by universities or employers, but in general, when we look at the requirement for English, the reason why this exam is required to be done is because one, English is not seen as your native language. It is something that is required by an employer, especially in the public sector like NHS, in particular, police, ambulance and emergencies, or for example, for those of you who want to get into teaching, they would want you to have gone through this particular, I would say, hurdle of completing the English, let's say English proficiency test, in the UK. Now, mature learners would normally not want to go back to school or sixth form and start doing GCSE. They would privately sit, but in some cases, what most learners do is essentially look at functional skills, which is considered equivalent to a GCSE English and Maths. Now, there is no grading in functional skills, but when you look at your GCSE or A levels as a grade, you have grade 4 to 9. So your functional skills is technically equal to a grade 4. That means you're minimum getting a C grade, not a D. D is a pass, C is a comfortable pass. So your functional skills exam in English or Maths or IT, if you're asked to take, then you are looking at by default scoring. If you pass this exam, you're looking at scoring something which is considered equivalent to a C as per UCAS and the Office of Regulation, Office of Qualification in terms of equivalency. Now, English exam has three parts. First part is speaking, listening, and communication. So essentially, this first part consists of three parts in its own, because one of the clear components of any language is related to speaking. That means I'm able to speak. You're listening. You're able to listen to me what I'm saying, and then when you give me feedback and you either nod or say yes, I understand, or whatever conversations we have, is the part which happens as communication. The second part is going to be reading, and the third part is going to be writing. So the English test that you end up giving is going to be a combination of three parts, and you have to achieve all the three parts to be able to receive a certificate from NCFE. Now, there are 5 providers which are in the UK very well reputed. Their qualifications are accepted. They are on UCAS, all universities, employees accepted. So they tend to be NCFE in terms of functional skills, because there's a bidding which happens. There are loads of awarding bodies, but there are 5 which are currently approved and are accepted, as a provider if you've done this exam. So you have Pearson, you have NCFE, you have AQA, you have City and Guilds, and you have OCR. These are the 5 bodies as per the .gov website. So you're looking at doing it with NCFE because we're a center for NCFE. And obviously, NCFE is the oldest awarding body in the UK, 175 years old, in fact, across the world. And if you look at the NCFE website, it will clearly say it is the oldest awarding organization in the world. So it's a very well reputed qualification that you do. And once you do your English and Maths, you would not need to do this again because it's a qualification for life. Now, English has 3 parts to it: speaking, listening, and communication. This is an exam which typically happens like an open book exam. Right? We have to release the topic to you at least, at least a week in advance. You are required to prepare your topic. You can take the help of internet, Google, and, obviously do your own research to prepare the topic and the notes part of it, bring it along with you. And obviously you are expected then to participate in a two-part test, which basically consists of a presentation. This would normally last between 10 to 12 minutes, and this is followed by a Q&A session. And the second part of the test is basically a group discussion. So in this, I'm not going to go into detail, but this part of the test normally happens in the center in our college. It normally takes about 2 to 2.5 hours. The whole test is recorded. There will be an invigilator which is present, which will basically act as a coordinator, and he or she would essentially then help you run the test and do the discussion and the presentations. Now, the second part of the test is reading. Reading and writing, if I put this way, both RW, as I call it in short, are tests that happen essentially on a PC. It is not a paper-based exam, not a paper-based exam. So I will show you the system as well. This particular test essentially happens on the NCFE system. And this NCFE system typically, is a computer system, and obviously the test is done electronically from the NCFE servers. So when you come into the center, you book the day on which you want to come in and do the test. What at some point in time will happen is we will launch this system. Once this system is launched, it will allow us to put a test code. And once the test code has been put, what then will happen is you will be running a test. And this test that you run essentially is a 60-minute test. So you get 60 minutes or 1 hour to be able to complete the test. Now, the reason of explaining this is to give you some insight into what you are actually going to face, so that when you're aware of how the test is going to be, what is expected to come in the test, you are going to be well prepared. Now, there is no way that we can increase the time, decrease the time, change the system, help you in the test. Nothing of that sort happens. Once the test starts, you check your name and your date of birth, and you confirm that your name is correct. What you do is you basically accept and you start the test. Now, the reading and writing tests are 1 hour each. You don't need to do both of them together on the same day. You can come in and do reading once, and if you're comfortable, maybe do the writing after that, or vice versa, or you can book them on different dates, not a problem. Now, the main part of facing a test is preparation. And I always give an analogy that, I've been driving for almost, I would say, 31 years. And if somebody was to ask me to take a test today, I would even fail, although I have 31 years of driving experience across maybe many countries. But the reason I would fail is because, one, I'm not prepared. Second, I've not revisited some of the key components or parts of the test which are going to be faced. For example, the highway code, some of the rules and regulations, maybe the signage and speed limits and other bits. So when you are faced with a test condition, one of the first things that you have to do is do preparation. You have to know about what is it that you're going to face, you should have a plan in terms of how you want to go about facing the test. Now, we are all mature learners, obviously, and at some point in time, because it's an English test, what we need to do is familiarize ourselves with the pattern of the test, what kind of questions are going to be asked, and how to prepare for those questions so that we are able to answer it well. Now, there are two aspects. Every side to the discussion or every argument has two sides to the coin. I want to score 100%. I want to score minimum 60% to be able to pass the test. So depending on your goal, sometimes what learners would do is, when we look at reading, it has 8 topics that you need to revise. And when you look at writing, it also has 8 topics that you need to revise. Now, this is something which I will show you also on Moodle, the way we have organized. These 8 topics would essentially form the test, and the test is 44 marks. Both the reading and writing is about 44 marks. Now, there are different topics, different things which come, but what we would want to do today is basically discuss in detail the writing component of it, because the writing component, according to me, is the simplest part that we can accomplish in the first sitting itself. All we have to do is familiarize ourselves with what is required and what is the writing exam actually consisting of and what kind of questions which come. Now, when I look at the aspect of the topic list, the reason we have to go into the topic list is because, if I say I want to learn to drive, obviously what you want to then do is get into the various aspects of it in terms of how you're going to learn to drive. So for example, you'll familiarize yourself with a car, you'll familiarize yourself with a theory test, and at some stage you will look at doing the practical. So there are three parts to that particular aspect of how you are looking at, going through a driving test. Similarly, in the case of English, and specifically in the case of writing, this particular bit that you have to familiarize yourself with is basically related to this context. If I just put this here.
You know, if you make you want to come for me,
Yes.
you don't tell me. I go content. No.
Good stuff. So some conversation in the background. My suggestion is if you mute yourself, if you're having a conversation.
So if I language is sleep now, Zigbo.
Francis, can you mute your mic? Yeah.
Oh,
can you mute
sorry.
your mic in the background? Yeah. Now, when we look at obviously the writing exam, there are, a couple of topics that we need to be aware of, because when we say it is a writing exam, there are some bits which should come to your mind in terms of what would be the marking scheme with regards to the exam. Now, because this is a writing exam, one of the things that you would see, which will be very important, will be spellings. We are doing an English writing exam. If you use words or if you write sentences or create paragraphs in your exam, your scoring is going to be based on spelling. So if you use wrong spellings of word, then obviously you're going to be penalized. This is the first section that I would suggest that you need to be careful about. So when I'm doing a writing exam, if I'm not sure about the spelling of a particular word, like for example, sometimes people write convenience, but if I don't know how I need to write the word and the spelling of the word convenience, I'd probably use something else, and I'd probably use a synonym and say, okay, it is very easy, maybe as a different word, to make sure that I'm not having a mistake in terms of spelling of words essentially. The second component that you are going to look at when you're writing doing the writing exam is look at your grammar. Because when you make sentences, when you write sentences or create paragraphs of sentences and convey text, and the meaning of the text that you're actually trying to convey, it should actually make sense. For example, I might say, can I get a glass of water? Right? Now, when I'm typing, because I'm a very good fluent typer of words, I don't look at the keyboard while typing. So I can make mistakes, but obviously in the Word document that you see on your screen, any mistake on spellings are highlighted by the word essentially. But when you're doing this test on the NCFE system, it won't highlight these spellings. So what I would do is I can right click on the word and obviously correct the spelling because I know this is wrong. But on the system, when you do it, the test, it won't give you this option of auto correction, which is normally enabled in Word. But on the test, you would have to look at proofreading to ensure that there are no spelling mistakes. Now, so the second most important part is how do you construct the grammar in terms of writing your sentences. Then the other bit that is more important is that whatever you're writing actually conveys a meaning. That means it is making sense. It is something that you are saying is actually related to the context which has been asked for, and it is related to the topic which has been given that will go into a bit more detail in terms of your writing exam. Then the other thing that you have to look at is organize your writing. So you should have, when I say organize the writing, sometimes like I've started a session today, I have a very clear thought in my mind that this is how I'm going to take this session. This is how I'm going to take you through it and make you understand how to do the writing test. So in my case, I have a story in terms of what I'm looking at as a session today. Within that story, I have a start, I have a middle, and I have an end. So what I'm going to do is make sure my session makes sense to you, and I'm going to plan it in such a way that I'm able to give an introduction, talk about the main points of the session, and then towards the end conclude the session to reinforce what we have discussed. That is what I would say is organize the writing. Then there are additional bits that you can do when you are essentially accomplishing this. One is, because it is a level 2 exam, one of the things that you have to keep in mind, it is a level 2 exam, which is GCSE equivalent. What you have to be able to do is write at an appropriate level. That means whatever you're writing has to be at a level wherein it makes sense. That means you have to show use of complex sentences. You have to use and show use of, or essentially use vocabulary, which is going to be commensurate to somebody who's writing at year 10, or somebody who has been learning English and is comfortable with the language, and able to bring out and articulate what they are writing at a level which is commensurate or equal to a GCSE level. So I can always write. If I was to write, for example, one of the exercises in the test, say, for example, was to write a letter to a friend explaining that you will be visiting her for summer holidays. Now, it's a very simple task. I can write this letter in a way wherein I can make sentences. And obviously, each of these activities that you are required to do will have a word limit. Because it's a writing exam, it'll have a word limit. It'll say write minimum 200 words. If you don't write 200 words, you'll probably not get the marks and you'll be failing in that particular activity. So when you're given this particular activity to write, I need to be able to write at an appropriate level. And now, if a child was writing it, or my daughter was writing it, who's 8 years old or 9 years old, she would be also able to write this letter, but her language and the style of writing is going to be very basic, because her vocabulary, after reading English for a number of years in the school, going through the primary school, will be limited. So here, one of the key things at level 2 would be that you need to write at an appropriate level. Now, after this, there are a couple of things. For example, when you're writing at appropriate level, you're conveying very clear meaning of what you're writing. You're also able to use persuasive writing. That means you're able to build arguments, you're able to give reasoning, and you're able to explain the topic by adding arguments to it, or adding pros and cons, or advantages and disadvantages, depending on the topic which has been given. And you also need to show that you are able to create complex sentences, which is with the use of and, which is with the use of, subjectives or adjectives, essentially nouns, pronouns, not going into detail, but essentially complex sentences. Now, complex sentences could be, something which would say research has already shown that if people are looking at weight loss, then they need to be looking at doing intermittent fasting. Now, this is a complex sentence because you've used research as a background. You've said intermittent fasting is required to be able to lose weight, and this is showing that you have a depth of knowledge which you are actually bringing across into the topic. So that would be, say, complex sentences. Now, these are the 8 areas which you need to be focused on in terms of writing. And obviously, when you articulate in a writing exam, you're writing in paragraphs. You're not writing in bullet points. You're not writing in short sentences. You're actually writing in paragraphs. So here, what that means is you have an introduction, you have a mid or the main points of your story, and a conclusion or a concluding conclusion, or a concluding remark. And that would essentially be showing that you are able to organize the text, you're able to put the message across by adding, meat, let's say meat on the bones, depending on what the activity is. And at some point in time, use arguments, complex sentences, persuasive writing, and that would show that you're writing at the appropriate level. So when I say appropriate level, I would probably say these 3 parts, would essentially be covering appropriate level. You are able to write and convey clear meanings, persuasive writing, complex sentences. You're writing in paragraphs, not bullet points. You're able to organize your writing, which could be at certain extent of, breaking it down into various topics like introduction, summary, main points, advantages, disadvantages, and the whole paragraph or the whole context that you have written in the writing exam, depending on the activity that you've got, it is able to convey that meaning. Now, once the conveying of the meaning has happened, you have to make sure that when you're writing, because it's a writing exam and you're going to be marked on writing in terms of the point scoring system, your spelling and grammar has to be accurate, and that is where you will be looking at scoring the 44 marks. Now, one last thing which I would like to put into this before we look at going into a bit more detail. Now, the writing exam, the reason why I say it is the most simple exam to do and pass. I have not seen any of my learners actually failing a writing exam. The reason is there are only two tasks or activities, I would say, which are required to be done. Only two tasks. Task one normally tends to be write an email or a letter. And task two tends to be write a report or an article. Now, when you are faced with that exam, the 60-minute exam or 1 hour exam, what will happen is you will only get two tasks. Task one, which could be either write an email or a letter. They will not be both. And the task two will be either write a report or an article. Now, what you need to know is how does a letter look like, and how does a report look like, how does an email look like, and how does an article look like. So visually, I'm going to try and show you how these things look like if you were to look at a letter or a formal letter essentially, and say a email and a report and an article. So let's look at them just visually, how the letter would normally look like if you are writing a formal letter, right? So let's look at an example of a formal letter. So I'm going to drag one letter in, and this would give you a clear idea in terms of how a letter should look like. Is it visible? Is it clearly visible at your end? Yeah? Is everybody able to see this?
Yeah.
All right. Now, the reason one of the activities is a letter is what I want to do is visually understand how a letter looks like. Now, if you look at what I've explained so far in terms of the basics of the writing exam, you would see that this letter is broadly divided into paragraphs 1, 2, 3, and 4. Generally, it could be 3 paragraphs, but in this case, just as an example that I picked up from Google, it is a 4-paragraph thing wherein it has your address, it has what you're writing to the person. There is no subject in this case, but you could have a subject. It generally has a name, dear sir, madam, because there is no name given specifically to who you're writing. You start off with a bit of a introduction to why you're writing this letter. You explain in 1 or 2 points or 2 paragraphs what is the context and why you're backing it up or asking for it. And towards the end, as you can see, it says conclusion. And letters, when you're writing as formal letters, you always end with yours sincerely or yours faithfully. These are closing sentences or words that you always use. So without needing to reason about it, if it is a letter which is going to come in your exam, and it is a letter which says write a letter to the council, letter to the head teacher, write a letter to a conference hall for booking, write a letter to, for example, a council to do an activity, whatever it is that you get, you'll always remember 3 aspects of it, and those 3 aspects of it are going to be these areas. You'll always have your address written on the right. You'll have the address which is given to which you're writing the letter on the left. I would articulate and put a subject down. Then you would say, dear sir, madam. If you're given a name, you would, because if you don't know that person, and I'm writing the person the first time to the person first time, I would say dear. And if it says Smith, dear Miss Smith, Mr. Smith, use your imagination, but use the title and then use the last name to be able to address that person. Now, if I was writing a letter to my father or a good friend or somebody that I know, then I would write by saying dear first name, dear Roger, or dear, say, Latifu, or dear Romina, whatever it is. Always have one paragraph which is introduction, one big paragraph which is going to be essentially the main body of the letter, what you're trying to get across, and then towards the end you have to conclude what is the result that you want, why are you writing this letter. So I look forward to receiving your response on, or I look forward to getting your permission for, or I look forward, something of that sort, that you are essentially reiterating that, I look forward the council organizing, this party, or organizing this permission, whatever it is. You're summarizing it towards the end. You always look at ending with yours faithfully or yours sincerely, and then you write your first and last name. You don't write your phone number, you don't write your email, because all these details are actually given up here on the right hand side for the person to correspond. Now, if I was to look at email, now, one of the other things which I will also show you, that when you look at this document on your NCFE exam, you'll have a very basic editor which will allow you to do these things. That basic editor will consist of only these 3-4 items. They will not be labeled, but you'll be able to center align the text, right align the text, or center, left, or right align the text. You'll be able to change the font. You'll be able to change the font size, and you'd be able to bold and italics and underline the text. That is all that you would have on your editor to be able to do these changes. You won't be able to, do fancy things like superscript or, other bits. But yes, on the keyboard, if I want to write apostrophe S, like I'm saying species or I'm saying spices, I'll be able to do all that. But the editor that you have on your test is going to be a very basic screen. And that is one of the reasons I recommend all my learners to essentially do a practice test from home. And you can do 3 practice tests from home on the NCFE website, which I will also come to towards the end of this session. And that is to familiarize yourself with understanding how the editor or the screen that you get on the PC when you do the test would look like and what it will allow you to do. Okay, now let's look at an email. One of the activities that you would get 100% is going to be either a letter or an email, right? So if you get, say, for example, a letter, you won't get the email. But if you get an email, then, essentially you would not get the letter. It'll be one of the 2 things that you're going to get. So let's look at an example email. How does an email look like, right? If I bring this across, this is how an email would essentially look like. What will happen is on the screen, when you're given the activity that write an email to, say, whatever topic we'll go into, it will basically give you an email address to which you're writing, a fictitious email address which will be given. And you'll have a subject area or a field which will be a row which will be available. So 2 rows will be visible there. One will be a email recipient that you have to put, and that email is given in the test. You have to copy and paste that email or write that in the recipient. And you have to appropriate or formulate a subject which is relevant to the topic of the email that you've been asked to write. And then you have an editor like this, an empty space, when you have to write your email. Again, go back to what I've initially said, 3 parts to the email. Starting with, there is no subject you need to write because it's already a row which is given. You start with dear or hi, and then obviously you have the introduction, you have the main body of the text of your email, you have a concluding part, and then you always end your email with regards, kind regards, best, whichever way you write, and you write your first name if you know the person very well and you're writing to them a number of times, assuming that you're writing to them a number of times. But a good practice would be to write your first and last name. So in the first activity that you get in terms of doing your exam, in the writing exam, will either be a text, either will be task 1 will be either a email, or it will be a letter. And that is visually, you need to know. This should be an image or a photograph that your brain should be able to click, that if a letter comes, oh, I know how the format of the letter is. I need to look at my address, the given address, 3 paragraphs, yours faithfully, yours sincerely, sign off with the name. If I am writing to something writing a letter for something that needs permission or is seeking an approval. Essentially, I'll also formulate a subject, because that subject line essentially would allow me to define what I'm actually doing in that activity. And if it's an email, you visualize that, okay, in the email, normally you don't write the address, you don't write the phone number and other things. You just write the to, which is the email to which you're writing. And then you have a subject row. And then you have the three parts again, dear so and so or hi so and so. And then introduction, main body, and then conclusion with kind regards, best regards, or regards. And you end that email. So this is going to be the first activity that you're going to get. This first activity that you're going to get is going to be 22 marks. What you have to keep in mind, it'll either be an email, one of them. It'll be either an email or a letter. It won't be both. Just keep that in mind. The second task is going to be a report or an article, not both. And that again is going to be 22 marks. Right? So let's look at how does a report look like. If I have to look at an example of a report, visually, let's look at how a report looks like when we do talk about, the second task which comes, and if it is going to be a report. So I'm going to bring across, a journal thing in terms of how a report would look like. And this is how a report writing looks like. Right now, if you visualize, where do you see a report? You pick up a newspaper today from wherever you're going. Maybe you're in the bus, you're in the city center. You pick up a newspaper, MEN or Manchester Evening News, whatever, and you read an article and you read a report. There's a difference between the two. One of the subtle differences between the report and an article is that a report is actually reporting an incident or an event which has happened in the past. So it could be an incident report, it could be an accident report, it could be a report that you are asked to compile because you're writing it as a headmaster of the school or a teacher of the school. You're writing a report of the performance of your of your students. It's a report which you're writing. It's a sales report, for example, that you're writing as a manager for your team, reporting to your boss. So report generally tends to be a combination or a summary. Essentially, the right word is a report is generally a summary of an event or an incident, and it's normally in past. You won't probably write a report, that, okay, I'm planning a holiday, and what will happen is you've been asked to write a report for a planning of a holiday. You'll write a report that I've been on a holiday. Can you write a report how your holiday went? So normally, and generally, 99% of the cases, report is going to be something that you write about when the things or the event have actually occurred. Now, how does a report look like visually? If I have to write a report, how does a report look like visually? A report normally has a heading on the top, which is normally bigger than, the text in the report. So in your editor that you'd have the option to change the font size and the font just the font size. You don't need to change the font, but the font size you would be able to change. So report would be having a headline or a title, and this is normally in a bold or a headline format. Now, you would need to formulate a heading for the report. That is the first part that you have to keep in mind, right? So first thing you have to look at is when you write a report, you visualize and you think of a headline. What is the report going to talk about? Holiday report, or it is going to be a sales report. It is going to be a research report. It could be a report, for example, medical report. It could be an incident report. So what you have to do is use the appropriate word given the type of task which has been given, and then formulate a heading which is going to be in bold letters or slightly bigger font size than the report writing that you are going to do, or the paragraphs or the context of the report you're writing. Now, after you've done the headline, second thing that you would do is basically because we are looking at writing a report which is 250 to 350 words. The word limit is for an article in a report is going to be between 250 and 350 words. So that means you're going to write about a page and a half. Mentally, you need to be deciding quite quickly that, okay, if we were to write something on a page, normally a page can accommodate up to 150 to 175 words. But if you're writing a report which has been asked for, or an article which has been asked for in task 2 or activity 2 of your test, that means you're writing a page and a half essentially to meet the word limit. Or if you're shorter in terms of your word limit, obviously you'll be losing marks. Now, visually, three things that you have to keep in mind. A report will have a headline, it'll have an introduction, it'll have the body, and then it'll have a conclusion or a summary. These are the base three things or headings, subheadings you will form in the report. We'll go into the specifics of it tomorrow when we actually look at doing a report writing with an example. But today, visually, we want to just understand what a report looks like and what parts of it have to be structured to get it right, to make it look like a report, because you're writing it on a word editor on the PC. So a headline, then some subheadings, which could be the introduction, one of the headings. It could be the main body, which could be something you describe about, which the report is asking, and the last would be the conclusion part of it in the report. So this would be essentially a style wherein you need to keep this in mind, that this is what a report typically looks like when we are asked to write. Then if you don't get a report, then what you're going to be able to get as an activity is essentially going to be an article. The article essentially would consist of, asking you to, use your creative side of things to describe, to talk about, and to write about something which has been given to you as a task or an activity. So as an example that I've done, I've used, this is an article which was asked to be written, which says, write an article on water conservation and what can it be useful for when we use natural resources like water and fossil fuels and things like that. So one of the activity was essentially write an article about water conservation. So here again, when you write an article, there are two things that you have to keep in mind and visually keep that in mind. One part is to basically say the headline, which is the article. So water conservation, and you're forming some sort of I would say a sentence to say, what is it that you're going to actually discuss in that article. And the second would be a byline, which will be something related to the article or related to the author who's writing the article. So in this case, it would be things like, for example, an article by so-and-so, an article by Raman Singh, or you could write a date, and that is how an article would be. Now, when you pick up a newspaper, what we generally get to see on a daily basis is that newspapers have lots of articles. For example, about Manchester United losing the Europa Cup final to Tottenham Hotspur. There was an article which is written by the journalist. And in such cases, you would be having different types of articles. But what you have to visually keep in mind is an article also has three parts to what the write-up will be. It'll have an introduction, it'll discuss about the main problem or the core area of what the activity is, and towards the end, you're going to put in or think about creatively what could be the solutions, advantages, disadvantages, pros and cons, or whichever way you put at it, and then conclude towards the end in terms of your writing. Now, an article will be written in a way wherein you're going to objectify and ask a lot of questions. You're going to get your readers involved. That is why it's an article. It's like a story that you write, which is on a topic, like, for example, in this case, water conservation, or an article on the cafe that you liked, or for example, an article on, reading books, an article on, for example, listening to music, an article on whether kids or children should be allowed mobile phones in the class. Those kind of topics would be discussed. So here, when you're writing it in such a way that you're able to engage with the readers that are reading your article, engage with your viewers who are actually going to be reading the article. Again, visually, just keep in mind today that when you are asked to write an article, you have a headline, you have a byline or a subheading, you have three parts to the article. One would be an introduction wherein you're actually laying down the foundation of what is going to be discussed and what could be the scheme of things which are coming through in what you're writing as an article. It'll have the main body of it, and towards the end you are concluding and giving readers an option to be able to get back to you, comment back, tweet back, whatever it is, because you want a conversation to start, you want a discussion to happen, and that is why this article has been written. So today's session is to basically help you understand what a writing exam consists of, what you are expected to do in the exam, how long the exam is, and when you do get activities, there are only two tasks or activities that you get: a letter or an email, or you get an article or a report to write. And visually, you should know that if in practical life, let's look at going outside the test for a minute. And let's say in practical life, in day to day life, in our daily routines, if we are asked to write a letter, how does a letter look like? This is what should come flashed straight away from your memory. If you're writing a letter, it is normal a formal communication. Why is it writing? Why is it that you're not using a phone call? Why is it that you're being asked to write a letter? Because when you are writing, writing is done to create a record that can be referenced in the future. Writing is done to create evidence that could be referenced in the future. That is why you're writing. You're writing a letter to the council to represent your parking ticket. You're writing a letter to the head teacher of your child's school explaining the reasons for absence. So what you're doing is, when you're writing, you're creating a written evidence which is required, or a record which is required, which then can be used or referenced in the future. So if you're asked to write a letter, three, four things should straight away click in your mind. Okay, I have my address on the right. Obviously, the reason why we put it on right is to differentiate it. But if you see a physical letter that you put in the post box, you write the name to which it is being addressed on the outside of the envelope. In the inside, you would normally on the right hand side start with your address, because you want the person to know the date and the address. You want the person to know that this is the person who's writing to me, and that is why you have it on the right side. But it is somewhere in the background that the person knows this is the person who's actually writing the letter. And then you have a subject line. You have dear sir, madam, or the first name if it's available. And then you have three paragraphs: yours faithfully, sincerely, and you close it by your first and last name. That's how a letter should be, because it is an official, I would say, official piece of communication that you're being asked to do, because this is going to be creating a record which can be used as evidence in the future. If you're to ask to write an email, email is quite simple. We use emails every day: Hotmail, Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo, whatever you use. And in the email, when you open, you log into your client, you always see two things: subject and to field. So in the two, you put the name to which you're sending the email. Sometimes you draft a subject. Sometimes if you're replying to email, the subject remains automatically, and you're just not writing anything on the subject. If you're not changing it, just start by saying dear, hi, whatever, and then again 2 parts, 3 parts to the email with kind regards, and you close it. That is how an email would be looking like. But when you get it in the exam, you're going to be required to write an email address, which is normally going to be given in the activity or the task. And you would need to formulate a subject, which is a 4 or 5 word sentence, which will be appropriate to the email that you've been asked to write. And then when it comes to report writing, three, four things should click in your mind straight away. The heading should be bold, and it should be a bigger font size. You have 3 or 4 parts to the report. A report is always something which is written describing something which has already happened in the past. Incident report, sales report, research report, accident report, whatever that is going to be, you're going to report as if you've seen it. Your construction of sentence, your grammar, your use of paragraphs again would be in 3 parts. The problem, you're basically describing the solution, and towards the end concluding with some sort of remarks. Here you don't put regards writing or best regards or reports, or end it with your name, because everything is going to be a report that has been asked to be written for by you. So you could write incident report, and then say a report compiled by Raman Singh. You can have that as a byline underneath the main heading, and that would be acceptable. And when it comes to article, difference between a report and an article. A report is written or observe. It's a record or an observance of what has happened in the past. But an article is an engaging or maybe something that you're writing which is going to happen or are going to put. It is going to put together your thoughts, and then you are actually writing to engage with the viewers. So if you're planning a holiday to Canada this year or Australia this year, you're writing an article to look at experience the best places to visit in Australia. Or if you're coming back from a vacation and you're writing an article, you would say the best places to visit in Australia or down under. And you would say an article by so and so, and that would be a byline. Again, you'll have three parts to this. Always remember, in writing there are always three parts to it: the main part, the introduction, the main part that you're writing, which is the story, which is where you're explaining the events, and towards the end you have a conclusion, or what you're asking for as a resolution, what you're expecting to get as an answer or problem to be solved is what is part put across as a concluding part in the last paragraph. And here again, you do not end the article or the report with any salutations at the end: regards faithfully, sincerely. No, it is just starting off, and you can have a headline and a byline where you can write an article by so and so, a report compiled by so and so, or some sort of a sentence if you need to identify that this is something that is being written by you. So visually, we need to understand that these are the four types of things which can come in the writing test. You would get two of them in the test to be able to write. The key points are each of the activities, 22 marks. You cannot make mistakes on spellings. You have to look at proper sentences. You have to look at grammar. You have to organize your writing in such a way that it clearly conveys a meaning. It is persuasive and you are able to write at the appropriate level. You have to write in paragraphs. That's why we have the three parts to it: the introduction, the main story, and the conclusion. And last but not the least, visually what the formats are in terms of writing and doing these tasks and activities. Last but not the least, there will always be a minimum word limit. So minimum 175 words. If I have to write an email or a letter, it'll always be minimum 175 words. And if it's an article or a report, it'll be minimum 250 to 350 words. This is something that you have to keep in mind when you're actually doing these activities, because it is related to writing, and writing can only be articulated if it has a certain number of texts or words, and that is where your scoring system will actually essentially work. Is that okay? Any questions on this discussion today? Any questions from anyone before we end today's session? All right. So I've got, that's fine. Recording of the class would be available, on the YouTube channel in any case, but I'll quickly show it to you so that you're all aware in terms of the Moodle, what context and cover we are actually covering, and where all are these things that you need to refer to, in terms of our discussions that we have done today. So let's look at showing you the Moodle and the discussion that we are having. So let me switch over to the screen. So all of you, those who are doing the English with us, should actually be aware of our YouTube channel. And the YouTube channel is youtube.com/UK Versity Online. That is something that you need to subscribe to. You should be able to go across on this channel at a click of a button and save it as a favorite on your phone, on your tablet, on your PC or your Mac, whichever you use, so that you're able to see all the recordings and all the sessions. So the link I will place again in the meeting today, so that on the chat, and you should be able to essentially, have that available at your end. Right. Somebody's asking any question. Yes, go ahead. Any questions? Anything that somebody was sharing something? Okay, so I will put this. This is the channel which is on the chat that I put the link. Now, where do you find the recording? So you go into live, And this is the live session that we are attending today, and that is being recorded here. So English, NCFE English Organized Writing, writing to an appropriate level, letter and email, and that's the recording that you'd be able to access. So I will be able to send you a copy of this recording on the group just after the session once we complete. The second thing which I want you to go and look at in terms of the Moodle is all of you should have the Moodle login. And when you have the Moodle login and you're able to log in, essentially what you're required to then do is at some stage, once you have logged in, you should be able to go to the English part of the course, which is NCFE, courses.
Yes.
And within that, you go to level 2 English writing. When you click on that, you should be able to click on the first button on the right-hand side, which says collapse all here. So when I collapse all, these are all the topics that are required to be covered in terms of writing. Now, what I've done is, obviously, as I started in the initial part and I explained that I'm going to look at doing this activity live and then bring across relevant topics that we want to be able to see and read when we are looking at revising English writing as a subject area. Now, if I was in your shoes, how would I start this? First and foremost, what I would do is basically go into the journal section. And in the journal section, what I would do is essentially look at a couple of visual areas. So, for example, a letter of complaint, a letter of making a booking, a letter asking for information, how do you write emails, and a report example and an article example. Now, these are the bits that I would want to, essentially look at visually that I've explained to you today. And they would be giving you a very good idea in terms of what a report looks like, what an article looks like, what a letter looks like. So as you can see, this is a visual example of a letter, another example of a letter, another example of a letter. And then there are some activities that we are going to do tomorrow to be able to do this. And how do you write an email, and some examples of formal email and, informal emails that you're writing. Formal emails could be an email you're writing to your boss, your colleague. An informal email will be you writing to your family member or, a member or a friend that you know. And that is where the idea is to familiarize yourself visually with the formats. And then the reason we are not able to see a report and an article is because they are Word documents that we have provided. So when you click on them, they download on your PC or on your phone and open there. Now, the other bits that I would suggest that you have to do is when you look at each of these sections, there's a recorded video, and this is a 10-minute video, which I would suggest that each of you need to go ahead and start watching, because in order to learn the language and to understand the writing component of the language, you need to be able to go and watch some of these videos which are explaining the key concepts. Now, if after the video you watched, you want to go into the presentation, then there is a presentation underneath that for that particular session. And that presentation you can also go through to understand what the video is actually talking about. And there are 8 of these topics that you need to go through. And my suggestion would be to watch each of these topics and each of these videos to familiarize yourself with the writing component part of the English test. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far? Any questions, anybody? Okay, that's great. No questions means everyone's understood everything that we are trying to discuss today, which is very good. So writing this document that I've created today, I'm also going to share this document with you, on the WhatsApp, so that you are having this document with you with regards to, just as a bit of a discussion that we've done, so that you have this document writing document with you. And if you need to refer it, you can actually refer it, offline after our session is completed. So today I've just made you aware of what the writing test would be consisting of, what are the components of the test, how long is the test, what kind of tasks are asked in the writing test to be done, what they would be marked on, and overall visually, how do you look at writing a letter or an email, and visually, how do you write a report or visually how you see a report and an article. Tomorrow's session is going to be focused on doing a practice wherein I will get into showing you how to write an email, how to write a letter, and then the second part of the bit would be to write a report and an article. So please make sure to join at 9 a.m. Considering it's a long weekend, bank holiday weekend, the idea is to get these sessions done before 10 o'clock so that you have the rest of the day to yourself. And hopefully, if you have any questions, any queries, feel free to write them down so that we can discuss them tomorrow before we start the session.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just I have a quick question. For the writing test, will I be given a specific topic, or will I need to choose by myself, like for the task, email, for the email, reports, and these kind of things?
Very good
Will
question.
be
So when you look at the test is going to have a topic which will be given to you on the PC. When you put the code in, when you come in, how would you book the test? You call us on the landline 0161 273 4745 and you say, okay, I want to come and do the test on Thursday between 3 and 4 p.m. So one of the administrators will book the test. When you arrive at the center, come 15 minutes early. We will print out a test code from the NCFE system, give that test code to you, take you into the invigilation room, and then once we put the code in, the test topic would come automatically. We don't know what topic will come. We can't give you a topic. The test topic will be automatically coming on that day. And the topics are different. But what you will get in that test is going to be two tasks, either an email or a letter, and the second part to the task will be article or a report. You'll not get four of these to be able to write. You'll only get two of them. That is why you have to practice with me to understand how to write an email, how to write a letter, or how to write a report or an article. What report will be asked to be written, or article will ask to be written, or letter or email, that will be on that day when the test is actually done. We don't know the topic and we cannot tell you the topic in upfront because we don't know the topic. There are so many topics which NCFE has, and they will, depending on the day, the test, when you come in and do, it will be automatically coming from the system.
okay. Lovely,
Okay.
thank you.
We need to prepare you to understand what will come, and that preparation will be done with me so that you know if a letter comes, any kind of a letter comes, we will be able to write. Any kind of an email comes, we'll be able to write. Any kind of an article or a report comes, I will be able to write. That is what I'm going to teach you as the teacher to be able to do in the test. So you will be confident. Oh, it's an article, I know how it is written. Article is a heading, a subheading, three parts to it, and I need to objectively write, engage with my readers, and think about what I'm writing so that it makes and conveys sense overall. That is what I'm going to prepare you with. It could be anything under the sun which comes on that day.
Okay, thank you.
Good stuff. Any other questions with anybody else? Okay, no problem. So if you don't have any questions today, that's fine. Think of any, and we will discuss them first thing tomorrow morning when we start. For now, thank you so much for joining this session. What I'm going to do is obviously send you a copy of this recording and this Word document on the WhatsApp group just after completing the session so that you have it for your reference and, if you need to revisit it. And then I will see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the day, and bye for now.